All right, I think that we can get started, and then as we give the introductions, we allow more people to join. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is José Leo Arango, and I'm the past chair of LA.IDEA. Tonight, I will be the moderator. LA.IDEA stands for Latin American Interior Designers, Engineers, and Architects. We are a committee of the AIA DC chapter with a mission to create a platform for interaction among Latin American designers and to foster representation and professional development. To learn more about LA.IDEA, please visit our website at LA.IDEADC.com, where you can find all of our events and programs. LA.IDEA Design Series is a unique virtual series created by LA.IDEA to recognize Latin American and Hispanic artists, designers, and curators for their professional journey and innovation in the field. The purpose of this series is to inspire not only the Latino design community, but also to extend our reach to a multicultural and interdisciplinary group of professionals. We would like to give a special thanks to the Smithsonian Latino Center for being the sponsors of this event. Tonight's session will be focused on the design and vision of the Smithsonian Latino Center's Molina Family Latino Gallery. We will have 4 presentations followed by a discussion and then a Q&A with the audience. This presentation is being recorded and can be used for future distribution by the AIA DC and LA.IDEA. Now, I would like to introduce our panelists. Eduardo Diaz joined the Smithsonian as the director of the Smithsonian Latino Center in 2008. Previously, he was the executive director of the National Hispanic Cultural Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's currently a member of the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture. Eduardo earned a law degree from the University of California at Davis and a bachelor's degree in Latin American Studies at San Diego State University. Carolina Uechi is a designer at Queen Evans who has contributed to many of the firm's high-profile projects for the Smithsonian Institution and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. She holds a Master of Architecture, a Master of Arts in Real Estate Development, and a Bachelor of Science from the University of Maryland. Mariano Desmarás is an exhibit designer with 2 decades of experience working for museums around the nation and the world. He's both an architect and a graphic designer. He's the owner of Museum Environment. Mariano grew up in Puerto Rico with a family of Argentinian heritage. He studied at the University of Michigan, receiving dual degrees in English and graphic design. He worked as an editorial graphic designer in Paris, France, before acquiring a master's in architecture from Columbia University. Andrés Clerici is an independent creative director and consultant for the planning, concept, and design of museums, exhibitions, and cultural projects worldwide. In 2010, he founded a creative studio Orb, based in Brooklyn. Andrés was born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and has been living in New York for over 20 years. Once again, we would like to thank our panelists for their time. And now I invite Eduardo Diaz.
Thank you very much, Leo. Thank you very much to the audience for being here. I want to salute my fellow panelists. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion on the project of building the Molina Family Latino Gallery. It has been an incredible experience, and we are moving along swiftly despite the challenges of the pandemic that we all, of course, are having to deal with. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to LA.IDEA and to AIA DC for making this forum possible for us. We're delighted to be here. You know, real quickly on the Latino Center, you know, we support research, exhibitions, collections, public and educational programs, web presence on the U.S. Latino experience around the institution. The Smithsonian is very large, 19 museums, 9 research centers, a zoo, so forth. It's huge, and our job is to establish Latino presence throughout the institution. And one of the ways we do that is through the development of space. which is what we're talking about now. The Molina Family Latino Gallery, which we hope to open at the National Museum of American History in the spring of 2022, is going to be the first, what we hope to be, permanent space for Latinos and the telling of Latino history, the contributions that our community have made throughout the years in building this country and shaping its national culture. So we've been a little bit like gypsies roaming in the desert trying to find a space, and we were finally able to find one at the National Museum of American History, which I'm very grateful for. You know, space is important. Space creation is important. We're creating a covenant with our community, with all communities that will experience what it is about Latino history. Latino history is American history, period. And so these stories that we are going to be bringing to the fore at the gallery sometimes may not be things that people know about. And so we want to make sure that we are able to tell these histories, tell these stories, and make our experience well known to more people. It's about the experience also. We're going to talk about that during the duration of this program. We are trying to create an innovative, captivating, compelling experience in the space that we are given. It's a 4,500 square foot space, and Carolina and others will talk more about the details of the space. And it's also about this message of inclusivity, that history matters, right? That people who made history matter, people who are making history today matter. This gallery has to be a home for all of our stories and all of our people. And lastly, before I turn it back to you, Leo, representation matters. It would never have occurred to us to have hired and to have worked with creatives other than Latinas and Latinos. It would just not have occurred to us. We need our people in this process to create these spaces for us. They bring to this project enormous cultural competencies. Our people have been designing for generations, for centuries, in fact. And I'm not trying to make that our designers are that old, but they come from a legacy, from a heritage of design, which is evident in the work that they bring. So we also have this responsibility, I think, at the Smithsonian to create opportunities for people like Mariano, Carolina, and Andres and others to be able to have this opportunity to put their stamp on a project like this. And it has been, to repeat, a marvelous experience. And we at the Latino Center could not be happier. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion and invite members of the audience to ask their questions and probe further. We're happy to talk about it. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you, Eduardo. And now, Carolina.
Great.
Yours.
Thank you, Leo. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. We are personally and collectively honored at Quinn Evans to be part of this project. Very briefly, I want to give a little history and some backup of how the project is structured to hopefully clarify some of those questions early on so we can really get to the fun stuff. So Quinn Evans has an IDIQ contract with the Smithsonian, and through that we were given the opportunity to interview to be the architect for the project. And we're grateful to have been chosen. SLC, Smithsonian Latino Center, had already done some conceptual gallery work with Mariano Museum Environments, so we added them to the team and we work collaboratively under the same contract. So our team includes Quinn Evans for architecture and project management, Museum Environments for exhibit design, and then the myriad of other consultants to support the project, from structural, MEP engineering through acoustical, AV infrastructure. The digital media and AV integration is contracted directly through the Smithsonian Latino Center, and that would be the Potion folks represented there in the photograph. But we all have a very collaborative working relationship to make this gallery happen. At Quinn Evans, we always strive for very collaborative design processes, and the process for the Molina Family Latino Gallery has been one of our strongest successes. Pre-pandemic, we had regular full-day charrettes where we would bring the entire team together, not only to present progress, but workshop solutions for everything from exhibit flow, digital media, color, finishes, accessibility of the gallery, which is something I'll speak to later in the presentation in more depth. We also had regular weekly meetings between charrettes with the full design team and client. So the process has really allowed all the stakeholders to have a voice and has not only provided more richness to the design process, but also stronger overall gallery design in the end. Next slide, please. So as Eduardo already mentioned, the Latino Gallery will be located within the National Museum of American History here in Washington, D.C. The gallery itself is roughly 4,500 square feet, but is part of a larger network of museums, the Smithsonian campus. So it's also quite significant, as it was mentioned before, that the gallery will exist within the National Museum of American History, further consolidating one of the key messages of this gallery, which is that Latino history is American history. And I'll also highlight that we have been very lucky to work closely and consistently with Access Smithsonian, which is the arm of the institution in charge of extending accessibility throughout all of these museums. Next slide, please. So I'll finalize this introduction piece by describing the big ideas and project goals that we collectively as a team established very early in the process. And that is designing a gallery with assets for future exhibits. This gallery currently, it's designed for 10-year duration, and within those 10 years, there would be temporary exhibits, which Mariano and Andrés will speak to more detail. Designing a gathering space for visitors. It was very important for us that this gallery really became a place for people to come together. Accessible design for a diverse set of visitor needs, portraying Latinos as active participants in history, providing innovative and immersive digital experiences, and then to promote intergenerational storytelling and cross-cultural experiences among our visitors. So these have guided us over the past 2 years. You will see these themes resonating throughout the presentation today. And with all of that background information, I will turn it back to Mariano and Andrés, who will start to get into the talk about exhibit design and the details of the Molina Family Latino Gallery.
Okay. Can you folks hear me now? Okay, because I lost I lost the image, unfortunately. Yes, it's asking me. It's asking me for an update, so I'm gonna. Sorry. Okay. So I'm gonna go a little bit. Actually, I'm gonna go to my. 1 second. Sorry. Right now, Zoom decided that it wanted to do an update on me. So I'm just gonna go to my presentation directly, so that way I'm able to see it. Pardon me for that. Well, my name is Mariano Desmarás. I'm principal of museum environments, and I'm very honored that we were chosen to work with Smithsonian Latino Center on this project. It really is a career milestone and for myself, a personal milestone, because I connect both my cultural heritage with my work, and that makes it even more enjoyable and fun. I want to give a little bit of an introduction about what is an exhibit designer, because many of you coming from architecture perhaps don't understand too well our profession. And our profession is about getting a story and converting it into a space in order to become an experience. So we combine many things. We combine the script that the curator gives us, the artifacts that we have, the media, the presentation, graphic design, and all those come together into a space that is cohesive and understandable by a visitor. The image you're seeing here is one of the earlier concept image drawings that we did for the Molina family gallery. It shows a rotunda space, and I'm hoping that's what's on screen. It shows a rotunda space, and that we had initially come up with. Next slide, please. It should be, there you're seeing the national, it's the Museum Design National Constitution Center. This is to say that we produce, when we're thinking about design, we're also thinking about the institution. And so when you create a gallery, create the sort of programming and combination of experiences that also reflect the mission's institution. In this case, it was about the, what's the importance of the Constitution of the United States. And so we gave a historical, a legal history, as well as different interactions that tell you the importance of the Constitution throughout our lives. And that couples with the mission of the National Constitution Center. Other things that we do, the next slide would be cultural heritage, the Museum of Chinese in America, smaller things. And we would work on a small gallery, a temporary show, And this is about to rescue, the story here is to rescue the cultural heritage. In this case, it was an apothecary, a Chinese apothecary from 1880s, in Oregon. And so with economy and means, we also want to sort of create it. And then also was a great deal of listening and being very careful about, the cultural heritage, and our curators would create a space for that. Another story could be the corporate branding of a company. And so we also would produce, in this case, a timeline of McKinsey and Company. The panels you see there in orange, those are McKinsey's values that they would publish throughout their history. And so this becomes a piece not only for visitors, but also for the employees to understand their own history and what their own brand is, the own employee branding, as we call it. The next slide would be placemaking in Radio Free Europe. This is, again, the story here is about mission. Radio Free Europe is in Prague, Czechoslovakia. It's the mission, it was born out of the Cold War, and it was trying to sort of send radio emissions, news emissions into the Eastern Bloc. And so their mission was to spread liberty. And so we created this sculpture that said liberty on one way and svoboda on the other. Which means liberty in Czech. These letters are 3 meters tall. And as you go by, they switch, right? They intersect each other. So you read liberty and svoboda back and forth. This is meant to actually be seen from a car, and there's a big avenue right in front of the building. So it's a way of creating a place and marking a place through a story. So when we come to the Smithsonian Latino Center, that would be the next slide, please. And here I'm showing some plans and sketches. We first had from them the interpretive plan. And that's not exactly what the curators offer, which is a script. Interpretive plan is what their goals are, the missions, and the kind of programming they're expecting to see. It's kind of an expectations of what the gallery should be in order to carry out their mission. We use that as a guidance towards it, but then we offered many different solutions, and we actually purposely try to make them pretty varied in order to build discussion about what is it that what would really work for them. It's also about management. What would their personnel be able to handle within the gallery? So, and then there are other sort of rules of the National Museum of American History about how do you treat artifacts. So all those things have to be talked out through this conceptual phase. And here you see plan and then the sketching below that correspond. And here we have 2 different ones, two of the first 4 concepts. In one, you see that there's a kind of center space, and we call that the photo. And there was going to be an interaction there with these sort of digital storytellers. And then around the perimeter, what you see is these kind of curved cases. We wanted to give it a kind of plaza kind of heart to the space. And the other one it's very similar, except that we move into plaza a little bit more forward to the entrance of the space. And that's the one you saw in the sketch before. The internal space was going to be a much more varied kind of interaction. And then the perimeter was going to have the exhibitors as well, but they would be much more porous. They wouldn't be behind glass. So that was the suggestion we were making. So next slide, please. These are another 2 options. We call this intersection and plan home. Intersection, we were thinking about Latinos also being diverse within themselves, and immigration being an intersection of cultures. So here we had a kind of more urban kind of trying setting we were trying to recreate and showing the intersections of different cultures. In the other one, we inverted it, and then we put the exhibit in the middle. And on the exterior, we created an envelope of media to sort of say Latinidad embraces all these things. And then we would have vignettes on the inside. And so that was the way of us starting discussion with the Latino Center, with the curators, and with the museum about what is it that they wanted to do. They eventually picked the first option, which was the photo, with some adaptations, of course. But that's because it offered them the kind of casing that they wanted to protect their objects. It offered them a plaza for the forum that they wanted to create digitally, and it offered them a kind of entrance experience that they wanted also to do. So for those reasons, and other sort of managerial reasons, and for instance, the way the budget was allocated in this was a little bit more upfront. We could spend a lot more in kind of building infrastructure that will last a 10-year life of the gallery, and less on the temporary part. So it was another way of managing the budget in that decision of taking that #1 space. So next, I would say, Andrés, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for LA.IDEA and AIA and Eduardo and the Latino Center team and Mariano to invite me to participate in this project. I have to say, design always starts with a challenge. And the first one in exhibit design is content, or the stories. And because storytelling is what shapes space. Not only that, but I mean, of course, is what makes sense in the space, but storytelling is actually the core of it. In this project, the challenge was that we needed to design a space that can last like for 10 years, but can also be accessible to changing exhibitions every 2.5 years now, and to also accommodate a dynamic program of activities. So the first thing that Quinn Evans, that Carolina talked about, and we'll talk later, was to address really the design to upgrade and renovate the entire gallery, which was for the within the museum, you know, in an older kind of shape. We helped with Mariano really to inform certain decisions based on the exhibit's needs for power, data, and lighting. And together with the Latino Center team, we identified that the gallery was going to offer different experiences, and therefore we needed to create different kind of spaces. But the important thing was really to have a cohesive exhibition design language that would really make the gallery have a unified identity, both from a three-dimensional, graphic, and art direction point of view. And we really needed to find ways to harmoniously fit casework, media experiences, a theater, a learning lounge, in a 4,500 square feet space. So if we would go to the next. So what we decided after what Mariano went through, which is like different iterations on where we landed after, you know, mostly a year or so, is we decided to put all the casework along the perimeter of the space, the very ceiling high, very strong and very manageable cases that would deal with like the whole historical aspect of the exhibition. And then we decided to put all the interactive and audiovisual media at the center of the space. And I will go through the details of what is in there later on. And towards the end of the space at the back is the learning lounge, which needed to be a more contained space for group activities and other events. So this is kind of where we land is an accent view that you all probably know, but we have to populate it with content and what visitors are going to see in that space. Next, please. So this is an exhibition floor plan, which tends to be different than the regular architectural programs, as they incorporate content areas, audiovisual and graphic coding to make sure that during production and installation, things are placed in the right location. So the story really falls in the right order. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of the components, towards the left on the front, that's the entrance of the space. And we'll have the gallery name, and then on both sides we have the donor walls and accessibility panels and the exhibit title. Then along the perimeter, each section will have what we call sensory nooks, which is like spaces for immersive introduction to the sections of the exhibition. And then we'll have also this 4 big cases and then the center cases there that really kind of carry the a careful crafting of historical and contemporary images, objects, and graphics to tell really the main story. And they're accompanied by the history consoles, which are interactive tables that really provide and complement information about what happens in the cases. And the foro is really a dynamic and contemporary storytelling area, which is the center space, which is populated with 8 interactive totems that we call digital storytellers. And behind that is the Somos Theater, which is an audiovisual experience that will be filmed and produced by Alberto Ferreras. And towards the end is the Learning Lounge. Towards the left, I would say, right behind the foro is another interactive map that really talks about demographics and current Latino issues. So as you can see here, the whole perimeter is more casework, more historical based, mixing contemporary with history. And at the center is really more the media core. And towards the right is really the Learning Lounge to have more privacy and all that. So if we move to next. So really exhibition tells stories. So therefore it's important to have a clear entry point and to start the visit. And I think in this case, as maybe you would have seen, we really decided for different purposes to start on the left of the floor plan. And although this story is chronological in some ways, we wanted to offer an open visitor circulation through the gallery as a way to encourage connections between historical information and contemporary issues. That means between the casework that is in the perimeter and the core that we call the fora. And in order also to make this content approachable and relatable, especially when it's related to history, we develop really a rich and layered visitor experience, which combines interpretive exhibitions and graphics, different kind of interactive experiences, audiovisuals, and immersive approaches, as well as different programming opportunities. So it's really like a very dense space, which needs to provide really not only historical and thoughtful storytelling, but also really media that it relates to contemporary, and also really have a space for programming in a space that is really, as Eduardo has said, like 4,500 square feet. So an essential goal from the beginning of the project also was that the experience and the content should be fully accessible to all visitors. So we work very closely with the Smithsonian accessibility team and different user groups to really address and develop an inclusive design and holistic approach to accessibility, really from the outset of the project. So let's move to next. And in exhibition design and of course in this project, we also develop really detailed renderings and throughout the project, from concept design to design development and final design. And this is like a rendering from final design, 100% design. And it really, we can really see in this space the ideas. So we first develop as an architecture, a 3D model of the gallery. We put the key 3-dimensional components, and then we design images for graphics and media that then are mapped into the model. And we carefully looked at lighting and also material finishes. And so this is the entrance to the gallery. This is where you see right now. At the top, you see the gallery name and a different floor treatment than the rest, but it kind of blends with the rest of the museum to really demarcate the entrance to the gallery. On both sides, and left and right, you have donors and benefactors that are recognized. And to the left of the exhibit, as I mentioned, we really wanted to convey an entry point. Although it seems open, the orientation of that panel, as well as the media piece, really orients visitors to go into that direction and entry on the left, because we wanted to create a really kind of more linear, at least, entrance to the exhibit, because that's where story starts. And then this central piece that you see is what we call Midas, which is a really faceted media element that is activated when people approach it, and really welcomes visitors to the gallery. Just wanted to say quickly that all the media aspects of this exhibition was developed by Potion, and we worked very closely not only with Latino Center and the curatorial team, accessibility team, but also with Queen Evans developing all the architecture, and also with Potion to really kind of translate this exhibit ideas into media. Let's move to the next rendering. And this is the case. As you can see, this is an example of the case. This is the first case. They're ceiling high, and they're located along the perimeter, and they kind of carry the thrust of the exhibit narrative. In this case, you're seeing the first exhibition, which is called Presente, which is the history of the United States seen from a Latino story, right? So, and here we use really historical objects that are borrowed from not only the Smithsonian, but also other museums. We combine them with contemporary arts, graphics and images to really tell key moments in the Latino history, and also those individuals that have contributed to shape the Latino story. Colors and text in the panels have been designed, and we have tested them for inclusive design purposes. You can see QR codes so people can activate them when they need them. And in this particular case, the case focuses on the impact of Spanish colonization in indigenous America at the very beginning when the Spanish arrived to the US, what is now the US. And then on the right-hand side, you see historic history tables, or consoles as we call them, that have interactive screens and touch tables to provide more context to the stories that are displayed in the cases. And they also have a keypad and a headphone jack for accessibility purposes and tactile objects. Next. And this is the center of the gallery, as you saw in the floor plan, is a multimedia plaza that it really encourages people to learn about contemporary Latino identity and plurality. There are 8 digital storytellers that we call originally totems, in which visitors can encounter Latinas or Latinos revealing different aspects of their story. They're really interactive. You can go and select the story based on your interest or a topic. And the back has more graphic, backlit graphic with quotes and questions that connect to the story and really provide a place for reflection. What you can see on the end of the rendering is the mapping the US Latino experience that is more an interactive in which people gather more information about demographics and issues that impact the Latino community today. And finally, to the left, you can really see the exit of the gallery where they learn more about the Latino presence in Smithsonian through events, the Latino Center and benefactors. Next. And this is the Learning Lounge, which you saw located in the floor plan towards the end. It has been designed more as a flexible space that can offer different kind of learning programs for various type of visitors and groups. It has a glass wall with graphics that invites people in, but also keeps privacy when needed. And the space has been designed through a modular system using different kind of sitting and storage and interpretive surfaces. We really kind of looked also closely in the choice of furniture that is in there as for instance, the conscious sitting. The space is really anchored by this lighting fixture that was created by multiple illustrations that Mariano will talk about from a Latino muralist. And the bookshelves will show latest resources and a projection screen will come down. So really the space can be configured really as a gathering space for really storytelling and self-learning, but it also can really take or become a venue for programs, book presentations, panel conversations, workshops, live stream presentations. So next. So moving on from the space to a more graphic space from an art direction point of view, it was important to juxtapose contemporary design approach to really historical content. We develop accordingly a color palette and typographic approach, as well as a graphic system that addresses the content hierarchy. And in order to tell this story, we develop really immersive environments at the beginning of each exhibit section and interpret exhibitions that combine objects with different kind of art approaches and objects, graphics, images to tell important moments in Latino history. So we work really closely with museums. I mean, especially the curatorial team at the Latino Center, work with different museums and historical societies, but also work with like artists to really craft different pieces so they can dialogue with the historical objects and images. And let's move to next. So this is kind of a basic color palette. We developed this color palette that mixes bright, identifiable colors with the more muted ones to really create contrast. The 4 colors really develop the 4 sections for this exhibition. This exhibition will be at the museum for 2.5 years, and when it opens in 2022. And then, of course, during the next exhibition, like not only the content, but also the color and the typography approach, of course, would change in this particular case. Next. And we also wanted to have 2 typographical approaches, a handwritten approach to make the main ideas outspoken, which are designed by Latino designer that Mariano will talk about, and a more neutral contemporary approach to tell and really describe ideas and main stories. Next. We also use a classic Latino inspired motifs to develop key exhibit components, like this exhibit title that combines historical Latino site-specific and contemporary metalwork with 2 different kind of typographic approaches that I talked about before. Next. And also to cater to the different interests and also speeds when visitors go through a gallery, we needed really to create some form of hierarchy that really helps those that we call really the visitors that just walk by and look at things really fast, to those who really kind of the study people that go and read everything. So you can see here on the right-hand side, you see a primary panel that we called in our jargon, a secondary panel, and then extended caption, long caption, and a shorter caption. And then really at the all at the bottom is what we call the reader rail, which would be backlit and illuminated along the cases. Next. So the main goal of the exhibition is to show the visitors of the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., that Latino history is American history. The Latino story is integral to the story and the history and the making of the United States. And therefore, some important aspects that the exhibition will put into question and it really will question certain things that are in our back of our mind, or probably not. And it's like, we were here before the European colonizers arrived. St. Augustine was the first European colony in the United States, not Jamestown. And we didn't cross the border crossed us. And as exhibition designers, this like 3 ideas kind of made us really understand that we're really kind of questioning kind of a regular paradigm of how American history is conceived. So in a certain way, that's why when Eduardo talked about is really, we really kind of focus on the Latino history. Latino history is American history. And then we really focus on 4 thematic areas. I mean, this is what the curator team came about. The first one is colonization and resistance, the impact and the consequences of colonization in North America. The second section is war and new US citizens, the legacy of the 19th century US expansionism on Mexican Americans and Puerto Rico. And the fourth one is immigration stories, which are immigration stories related to political persecution, family reunifications, violence, lack of opportunity. And that really spans between the end of the 19th century, but primarily 20th century. And then this is like shaping the nation, which is really the role and importance of Latinas and Latinos shaping the community in the last like few decades. Next. And this is what we call the nooks. So I'm going to show here just like quickly a few kind of graphic and approaches to really see how what we call the exhibit architecture come together. These are at the beginning of each section. There are sensory and immersive environments that serve to introduce each exhibit section. They're anchored by a case, which has an important and critical object. In this case, I don't know if you can see it, but it's what we call a matagine costume, which really shows this blending, this relationship between the indigenous and the Spanish traditions and colonizers. Around that case, there are backlit graphics, and in the front, there are projections that serve to really contextualize the object. And we'll also have audio to really create this immersive moment, and also a graphic that really introduces the entire section. Next. And this is the first case. As you can see, it's a really a big composition of graphics and objects and images. And really the main idea here is to integrate rich stories into the cases using a dynamic approach to really engage citizens, visitors. In this case, it really focused on the impact and consequences, as I said, of the colonial, the process of colonization in North America. I don't know if it's really worth it, but I could say, you know, as probably in the very first part, the orange panels really indicate primary text. But if we go to the first one, really one idea was to really juxtapose some really indigenous archaeological objects that come from like a date between the 1200, 1500 in North America with a real, with a current contemporary depiction of what we call Turtle Island. It was done by Jesus Barranza in 2015. So really this juxtaposition of historical and contemporary really is important. It also kind of, in the second section that you can see at the bottom with the person doing this, it's also to juxtapose that, right? We contrast a poster from 1973 by Augusto Marin, really, which is about the centennial of the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico, which dialogues with more personal and historical objects. Next. This is just really to show you how the architecture of, I call exhibit design is, a series of identifying content, graphics, and objects that really need to come together to tell the story. And we code them and we lay them out in a certain way with a very complex series of spreadsheets and layouts. Next. And I will go quickly through it. This is a nuke of the third section, which is a printing press, the object used in New Mexico to print Spanish newspapers. This one is really about war and new US citizens and the legacy of the 19th century US expansionism. I think I will skip the details of this so we can move forward, but this one is the fourth one. This is a raft that will really come from the 1990s from Cubans that came to the United States that will be borrowed from the Anacostia Community Museum as an anchor of this, to tell these immigration stories. Next is the fourth section, which is really about telling those immigration stories and the different reasons why people come to the United States to build their own stories, those seeking safety and democracy, work and opportunity, and the story of Puerto Rico and diasporican. And lastly, here we have, let me stop this. Sorry. This is the nook that has also shows the work of the collaboration with an artist, which is The Tree of Life by Veronica Castillo, and then we'll focus really on the role of and importance of Latinos shaping the history of the nation in the next section, as you can see here. So this is the intro to that. And this is really those Latinos that have helped to build the community, fighting for injustice and justice, and also those who broke the boundaries and really worked for innovating standards, creativity, and etc. So I'll pass it on back to Mariano now to talk about more the collaboration that we have. No, to Carolina, I'm sorry. To really talk about, to really talk about the more accessibility and the overall approach to it.
Thank you, Andres. So yeah, I will spend the biggest portion of my presentation speaking about inclusive, accessible design, given that this has been a fundamental goal for this gallery and exhibit from the very beginning with this team. And so I'll start by saying that inclusive design is about integrating equality and diversity in the design process. And it's about designing buildings and spaces that can be used and enjoyed by everyone, regardless of age, ability, circumstance. It's not really just about abilities and disabilities. It's much larger than that because it encompasses all aspects of human diversity. But one of the most typical biases that sometimes we carry with us as designers is the ability bias, that because we think we can see, touch, read, hear something, we assume everybody else can do so as well. And that we, all experience things equally. So we have been working hard at the Latino Gallery to work against these biases and consider as many diverse people's thoughts, concerns, and ideas into the solutions as possible. And I'll, just make the important distinction here that something that we came to understand over time working on this is that, accessible design meets the statutory requirements for access, but inclusive design will go beyond that. And you're trying to provide creative solutions that allow as many people to have an equitable experience as possible. Next slide, please. So the Center of Disease Control, the CDC, which we've gotten very used to hearing about this year for different purposes, tells us that 1 in every 4th person in the United States lives with a disability, whether that disability is temporary or permanent, whether it's visible or it's something that may be less apparent. Disabilities are not just about people in a wheelchair. It's much more wide-ranging than that. And it can be broadly categorized into these 3 areas: the physical, the sensory, and the brain-based. And sometimes they're overlapping as well. So this can include everything from people who just may have a heart condition, people with stamina limitations, strength limitations, people with learning disabilities. This very kind of old-fashioned fixed demographic we used to think about when we talked about people with disabilities is quite, outdated. And it's much better to think about it as kind of a spectrum. It's part of human diversity and encompasses all areas of our health and our functions. So, the last thing I'll say about this is that each one of us may not recognize ourselves as having a disability, but, we will all experience these barriers at one point or another in our lifetime. And something we can all agree on is that when we strive for inclusive design, it will automatically result in better design for everyone. Next slide, please. So in the same way we can broadly categorize disabilities, we have to consider that there's many different ways for people to process information and take in content. Some of us may be visual learners and we prefer reading things or watching somebody do something. Some of us are auditory learners. We do better with oral or hearing information. And some are kinesthetic. We'll do better if we just try to do something, get in there and try to see where it goes. So in a museum where we want to attract diverse audiences, these are all things, all parts diversity that are critical for us to consider and address. Next slide, please. So something important that we also learned from working with Access Smithsonian and this team and the Institute for Human-Centered Design is that no single tool, approach, or experience is going to serve everybody well at the same time. There's not going to be one solution that you can just apply to everything and then magically make it accessible to all. The key is really to provide diverse ways to access the content and diverse experiences for people, meaning that there are multiple ways people can participate in a space, whether it's physically or socially, in how the content is accessed, what activities or programs are being offered. And the truth is, when we layer these elements together, when we also consider multi-sensory experiences, we end up creating more engaging and meaningful experiences for everyone. Next slide, please. So I want to start with the most familiar information that we as architects and exhibit designers tend to think about when we think about accessibility, the physical components that all have to work together in order to truly make an accessible route. We're familiar with this, but there's a lot that has to come together. Next slide. And so as you would expect, as a team, we started by looking at those physical statutory requirements, but we studied them, not just as something to check the box, just requirements, but thought about what this meant for our visitors. What are the human implications of these requirements, and questioned what kind of spatial and therefore, also welcoming design we were going to strive towards. A very simple diagram here talks about just the minimum requirements for a path in an exhibit, where you have a person standing on one side looking at a case or an object and a wheelchair passing by. But we know that each condition is unique based on what kinds of content or objects we have, or what we're asking people to do, how we're inviting them to do it. So we may consider that we may want to expand that. And in some places, a dimension that allows 2 people in a wheelchair to pass through may be more appropriate, for example. So these are the kinds of discussions we have at each case and each scenario. Next slide, please. And I'll just highlight some of the things. There's many things we looked at, but some other things we considered are, the viewing sightlines and what that means for diverse audiences in different age groups, and how those ideal sightlines would overlap and guide us in deciding how the visual content could be arranged and what hierarchy of information we would establish within these cases. Next slide. We, as mentioned earlier, the immersive and innovative digital experiences were crucial for this project. So we had to start to question how we were going to make those truly accessible. And we started by looking at, comfortable reach heights, knee clearances, locations for interactive controls, just as a starting point of, the physical elements we had to consider. And these are just some of the, many considerations we talked through as we workshopped all these elements to give you, an idea of what, how important these factors really are. Next slide. So from there, we embarked on this mapping exercise. This is something we developed, as a way to visualize access issues and collaborate as a team on critical design decisions we had to make to enhance the visitor experience. It's a lot easier to hold ourselves accountable to our goal of inclusion and accessible design if we can start to map some of these ideas and test them in place, at least as a starting point. And what you see here is one of the very earlier floor plans. I'll talk a lot about just process, since this is really about collaboration. And we began by illustrating these conditions and thinking about how our space was working. And there were a lot of positive things, that we realized we were already doing. We had areas where we had the ability to have multi-abled group activities. We had front approach for multiple interactives at the same time, so people aren't waiting to take a turn or they don't become obstacles in the space, and it's quite uncomfortable. We had companion seating, so we made sure that we were integrating people to be together while they're experiencing. In this case, it was the Latinos United, now the Somos screening. Next slide, please. But we also had a lot of challenges that became visible to us when we created these diagrams. We had areas of pinch point at the entry. We have a lot of content. We have a lot of exciting things we're trying to pack into this one space. And it can be really difficult when we start to think about how people would interact and use that space. And one element that I'll maybe highlight a little bit here as an aha moment, I'll focus on the area all the way to the right that I marked tight. That's the section nook that Andrés talked about that has the balsa, right? And the balsa, often known as a Cuban raft, these are precarious vessels that are built and used by many people who emigrate from Cuba to the United States. Often these people are referred to as balseros. And this is an object and a sensory nook that is quite emotionally charged. It is expected to incite empathy from the visitors, as well as a level of respect for the balseros who came to the US in these boats, risked their lives through these journeys. And there's a level of ingenuity in that as well, right? So to truly appreciate this object, the scale of it, the construction of it, to observe the immersive digital projections Andrés talked about, to hear the sounds that contextualize and tell the story about this journey, requires a certain amount of comfortable space for the visitor to have this powerful experience. And yet if people are being asked to stand here in this zone and then standing back to back, observing both the nook as well as the cases, although we're meeting our requirements and we have enough space, we're not really providing the best experience we could provide. So I'm just using that as an example of these things that we start to visualize and think about, and they come forth to us when we go beyond just the plans and the sections and start to look at these maps. Next slide. So, I won't linger too much on these, but, these are all snapshots in time. They're part of the process. They show how these maps informed our decision-making. Next slide. We started to pick up a lot of these things. We changed the front approach direction of the historic consoles, the tables, and alleviated the circulation and gave people more space so they could observe the cases with more time. We changed the orientation of that nook of the balsa, for example. Next slide. But of course, at this point, since this is also in the past and these are, this is part of the process, we still identified areas that were quite difficult and we had to negotiate. And, as it's been mentioned before, we're asking a lot from this space. We have a lot of things we wanted to put in here, a lot of experiences we wanted to create. So these kinds of diagrams and these collaborative decisions help us weigh those things and really think about not forgetting accessibility and inclusion when we're making these decisions as well. Thank you. So yeah, we spent a lot of time looking at these physical elements in the space, but something even a bit more unique we began to consider is how could we also test other aspects of design, the multisensory aspects of accessibility, right? To not just focus on the physical, which is just one area to be considered. And multisensory mapping, I'm going to read a definition here, is simply a flexible technique that identifies sensory highlights with a view to creating inclusive and engaging visitor experiences. What it really means is, we're just asking people, individuals or designers, to explore a space, walk around the site or the exhibit, and identify where they encounter sensory stimuli, such as sights, sounds, smells, textures, and you collect that information, you represent that information, and then you use it to implement design solutions and prioritize access improvements. So it's really a way for us to move, into considering these senses more intentionally and think about how they help with wayfinding and how people feel in terms of the comforts and the spending patterns throughout the space. And what we were trying to do with multisensory mapping is to develop a tool, come up with something that could help us map these individual senses, represent them in our space, and see how we were doing with these aspects of design. Next. So how can you use sensory mapping? It's very broad. I mean, you can use it in many, many ways. In our case, we used it as a design tool, right? So we were using it to make sure that we were providing those layered experiences and approaches to access content and to employ those different learning modes I spoke about earlier. You can also use it as a way to track the quality of the experience you're tracking. How comfortable are the spaces? Are they loud, quiet? Are they crowded, sparse? Are they cold or warm? Also, you can use it to track emotional responses you're evoking at each location of the design. How is the exhibit content organized to facilitate that visitor pacing and the visitor experience in relationship to the emotional responses that we're evoking? Next. And so what you can see here is one of our many charrettes. We're all together here trying to map these emotional responses. You see the design team, the digital media team, SLC staff, curators, NMAH curators, educators, IT project managers, facilities engineers, the accessibility team. We had a big team, a lot of people weighing in here, and we're collaborating and testing our understanding of the space, how the content is arranged, and what key messages are we trying to address at each location. Next. The other side of sensory mapping, if you're not using it as a design tool like we were trying to do it, is to use it when the space already exists. And in this case, you're using it as a tool to empower the visitor. It's for them to chart their own course and their own experience through your gallery or through your museum. So in that case, it's a pre-visiting planning tool, because we know that people with disabilities like to do their research before they visit. They want to know what to expect and, what are the accessible routes, and they want to decide if they want to go visit in the first place. So this is a simple sensory map diagram from the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It's on their website, and it gives people, a sense of what they can expect when they arrive. Where are the areas that are quiet or loud, areas that have natural light, areas that have tactile engagement. That level of predictability can be quite important for a lot of people. Next slide. So, with those thoughts in mind and those ideas, this is just a snapshot in time of some of our sensory maps. We mapped things that included the physical, the social, and the purely sensorial aspects of design. And we were using that to help us then prioritize those access issues and design decisions we had to make to create a better place. All of these things together make that visitor experience ultimately. So I'll just dive into one of them, just to, again, provide kind of like a sense of how we were using this as we were designing and we were thinking about these different senses. I chose the sound diagram for today to give you that kind of process information. This was one of the original, one of the earlier design versions. Next. And one of the things we realized very early, just going through this exercise, is, at that point we had the Latinos United, or the SOMOS video screening, projecting as this round system kind of feature directly into the fora. And, again, we're trying to pack a lot of things here. So when you're placing all these elements, it takes some time to realize how are they actually interacting together from a census standpoint. Next. We also realized we had a lovely fora, but there were a lot of storytellers. And if all of them were activated, then you would have the issue of a lot of competing sounds. Same with the digital tables that had their own sound features. Next. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we realized, well, we have some sound deserts at the cases at this moment in time. We didn't have any audio descriptions or any oral or auditory content. So if a person was blind or low vision, it would be extremely hard, if not impossible, for them to get anything out of the content that is so important and the messages that are being told in these cases. Next. So again, this is part of that progression. It's part of how we're using this as a tool to look at and think about these elements. Next. And, we at that point had introduced audio stories as a way to share some of the key components and messages of those cases, but we still had a lot of audio sources. And part of it is because we were trying to provide an audible content in every possible location that we could. But we had also chosen at this point, for example, for the storytellers, these directional speakers, the sonic beam directional speakers, which project sound forward. And part of it was an aesthetic choice. We wanted a visitor who comes to the storyteller to feel like the storyteller was talking directly at them. But it was actually creating a lot of overlap and acoustic concerns. And obviously we work with our acoustician, we work with consultants. So these maps also helped us work not just with our stakeholders, but with the consultants as well. Next slide. And so one of the things the acoustician, for example, early on recognized when we were talking about these things and drawing these things is with these forward projecting speakers and the curvature of our cases and the hard surfaces they provided, sound was going to be bouncing back directly to the fora. And there would be these instances where, I've circled, for example, people, where if you were standing on that spot, you would hear the storyteller on the other side, and it would be incredibly disorienting as to where that sound was coming from and why you were hearing it in those locations. Next. And of course, that also applied to anything, any sound source that was being projected directly to the glass surfaces. They would inevitably come back bouncing into the fora. And although we wanted to create a lively space, we for sure did not want to create a confusing and intelligible and also disorienting acoustic space. Next. So the design progressed. You can move on to the next. We started to make some decisions based on these discussions. For one thing, we provided sound isolation. The Latinos United, now called the SOMOS, has its own theater. Again, we're negotiating a lot of spatial things, right? We're trying to pack a lot. So these things help us prioritize what's needed. We changed the type of speakers. We use overhead directional speakers. Those have they're much more able to be controlled in terms of their sound dispersion, and they're pointing sound down onto the carpet. So we're starting to capture and absorb a lot of these sound waves. We also changed our strategy for the historical consoles. Instead of just having sound project, now we give the visitor a choice. If they want to access the sound or the auditory content or the audio descriptions, they can plug in with their headsets, or they can use the handsets that are provided within the design. Next. So, I'll end this part of the presentation on this, speaking about the second part of all of this, that we can map and visualize design as much as we want, but at some point it's critical to test things at real scale and in real time, and look at them and touch them and hear them and move around them. So what you see here are photographs of the whole design team and SLC. We're building things out of foam core. You see Mariano and Andrés printing labels. We're all looking at them together for creating these mock-ups, thinking about and testing different color contrasts, typefaces, height, lighting quality, whether there's like reflection in the glass, and how it affects people at different heights, length of text. We built foam core prototypes of some of these tables and storytellers to understand their dimensionality, how people were going to approach these things, how comfortable they were, where would the controls be located and are they accessible or not. So it's a very, very thorough process where we were all learning together and really going beyond what we had previously done in many projects. Next slide. So I'll end on this portion on this note, that maybe the most important part of this whole process was and is the engagement with the user experts. And user experts are a person who has developed expertise by means of their lived experience in dealing with the challenges of the environment due to physical, sensory, or brain-based functional limitation. So, ultimately, if we're going to strive for inclusive design, it's really about bringing people into the process to learn from them, hear their reactions, their concerns, and then be able to take all of that information to redesign what needs to be rethought. We really only know our own personal experience. And this is really the best way we have to embrace diversity of our audiences and bring it straight into the design solutions. And the information we get at times is overwhelmingly clear when we test things, and at times it can be contradictory or different because everyone's different. A person may be comfortable navigating things with their mobile device, for example, and finding QR codes on the wall. That's what was being tested on the photograph on the very right. While other people are not very comfortable using their mobile. So maybe the QR code is not the best way for them to access additional information or audio descriptions. So we have to take into consideration all of this information and then prioritize decisions and think about how we layer these options so that visitors with different preferences and different needs can choose how they want to interact or engage with the content rather than being told exactly how to do it. And I think, it's much more difficult, it's much more complex, but it's also, that's what the creative process is really about. So it's been a very eye-opening experience, and we couldn't have been able to do this without the continuous support, education, the collaboration with the full team, and what we've learned from Access Smithsonian and their team of experts. So Leo, I think I have 3 slides here that speak more about the architectural finishes and the material quality of the space and the black box. But I think in the interest of time, I think we can just look at them. I don't think I need to go into describing each one of these elements. I would rather pass the presentation back to Mariano. So some of these finishes we've already talked about, but we can just look at them to have a sense of what the gallery is starting to look like. So you can go to next. You can see here we're trying to emphasize and create a space, the heart of the gallery, and we're using a lot of warm tones, both in the metal finishes that we choose for contemporary language and in the warm wood and kind of textures we're creating with the other surfaces. Next. Somos Theater will be, I think Mariano will speak to this, but there will be an artist installation there. And once that is finished, it would become kind of like a jewel within the rest of the gallery. Next. And then the Learning Lounge, where we spent a lot of time thinking about creating a very comfortable space that appeals to people of all ages. We have acoustical panels and tackable panels. We had to think about durability, accessibility, and the space is neutral and bright, and the mobile or the art installations are really the focal point of this room. Next. I think with that, I will pass it on to Mariano. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. I just want to say one thing back to what Carolina was speaking about. In my 20 years so of designing exhibits and museums, I've never gone into such depth into inclusivity. It's a unique project in that way, and it's thanks to Smithsonian Latino Center that really spearheaded this and really wanted to make this a central part of the design process. And even in projects like the National Constitution Center, which is a tens of millions of dollars project, we didn't delve into in this manner. Okay, back to my topic. We should be in the art direction slide. So one of the questions that we had was, how do we design and do an exhibit design that is uniquely Latino? Because we also wanted to speak it with our own voice. And so the design voice also had to be that. The Bauhaus doesn't quite make it, to be a Latino voice. So as we all been taught in art school. So I wanted to sort of find a process that was then also uniquely Latino and would be authentically an expression of what we were trying to do. So here come some 5 key concepts that would help us guide us through there. The first one is focalization, and that actually is a term I'm borrowing from my literature studies, which is the perspective through which a narrative is presented. It's called focalization. So it's a kind of funnel that happens through the narrator, and we wanted to sort of make visual the narrator of this story, which was the Latino's perspective. And we have different kind of art direction techniques to sort of make that visual. Placemaking is also about giving a mission to that space and identifying the heritage of that space. Unlike other galleries in the National Museum of American History, which is about a topic, right, a moment in history, this was a gallery dedicated to Latinos for 10 years, and then there'll be different rotating exhibits within that. But we wanted to give it that envelope of institutional envelope of the Smithsonian Latino Center that is dedicated. It's a dedicated space for that. Self-representation, very important. It's not only what we say, but who says it actually, it matters. And that includes then the visuals that we choose and how do we make those visuals. And so we source from people we know and the curators know and other people know, and we source different kind of artisans and artists to create visuals for that. Co-creation is kind of related to that topic of self-representation, but it takes it a little bit further into actual design pieces. We have a theater here where we asked another designer architect that works in the Southwest doing experimental work, and he co-created with us this piece there, which I'll be showing. And resignification is another term. I borrowed that from David Adage, the architect of the African American Museum on the Mall. And he talks about taking, building culture or methods and or material heritage, but then transforming that, resignifying it into a new program, a new purpose. So there is a location of where that culture is, or that method is taken from, what culture is taken from, but then it's not static, it doesn't lie there. It keeps evolving and moving forward. So next slide, please. It should be a slide that shows Isabel Urbina. She is a Venezuelan hand lettering artist, and she's an award-winning artist. And so this was part of focalization. For all of the nooks that we will be presenting, on the right side, we're going to have the title hand lettered by her. What you're seeing here is some of her work. It's part of her portfolio. Next slide. And then we gave her art direction, and these are posters from Dividetco, which is it was a a program in Puerto Rico that had a very strong graphic impact on the island. And then we used, and it was strongly typographical and handwritten. So we said that, and curator liked these a lot too. He actually done an exhibit about this. And it just happens to be my favorite, one of my favorite graphic heritage artifacts. So we gave her that as an art direction. And so we go on to the next one, and it's a side, it says presente. And we were here already, aquí estábamos. This is part of her presentation of the hand lettering typography custom made for this exhibit. So the title, what you see here, we were here already, that has changed already, but the style is what we're gonna be using. And that's a kind of way of showing the voice that this comes from a certain place. And that's the way we identify it, through the typographical style. The next slide, where we show the gates. And there you see it presented and incorporated into the gate design, along with ironwork. And so this is an ironwork. We have a piece of cut metal, CNC metal, that would have her typography. Below, we have a piece of walnut wood, which would have been a regular typography. And behind it is a stucco wall that's illuminated. And then we see a little bit of the rendering of where it locates that within the entrance of the gallery. Then for placemaking, we look for the help of Rafael Lopez. He's a Mexican illustrator from Mexico City and practicing in San Diego. He does a lot of murals around the area of San Diego, along with with schools and getting help from high schools and students and community groups. So we wanted to use that know-how and that kind of aesthetic for the developing of, the next slide please, it's this chandelier or graphic mobile that will go in our educational lounge. So these are chandeliers, in fact, because they do have a lighting inside of them, and they'll be illuminated. And you see here the design on the bottom. You see these kind of green panels. That's just to show the panels. His drawing will be then applied to that. And so we'll go back and forth, with his designs and the 3D drawings on how to coordinate these two things, and then create this kind of celebratory mobile up on top of the education lounge. We will also use him for portraits, and these are some of his portraits from his portfolio. Self-representation is important, so we wanted to make all the portraits. Every time we talk about a profile, a person, a historical figure, he was going to draw that person. It gives us also flexibility because we're able to tell the story more quickly through the different props that can be easily incorporated into an illustration. And that's why I show an illustration sort of 3 times. That's Pura Belpré. She's a librarian from El Barrio, New York. That was very well known for the kind of educational initiatives that she established in El Barrio. So we're going to be using him, and then the next slide, and incorporate it into our, something like this would be our reader rail. And there you see on the bottom a little snippet of the case. The reader rail is that graphic that goes horizontally along the edge. And so that's part of our graphic language. And it'll create a great consistency throughout the entire presentation of the exhibit. We're able to then coordinate color-wise. And so then in co-creation, resignification, the Somos Theater, the next slide. We will work with Ronald Rael and Virginia Sanfratello. These are architects that work in the southwest of the United States as well as California. He's also dean of the Berkeley School of Architecture. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. Associate professor of the School of Architecture. And we were interested in them because he looks at the sort of different ways of building adobe and ceramics that happen in the Southwest and that Latino heritage, and tries to transform it again through 3D printing. He's done other projects like the one you see here, the seesaws that are on the border wall. so Mexican kids and American kids can play on the seesaw right off the border wall. So he's very conscious of this transculturalization. And so we're getting him to work on our Somos Theater, which will be a piece within the gallery. And to me, this was a great step because in many ways, it's impossible for me to say that me as Latino can know everything about Latinos and know all have that breadth. It would be a presumption of me to say that. So bringing in artists and other people is actually another way to sort of to expand that language. So, and then here we have a slide with pottery, a lowrider, and paintings from a chapel. This is part of his presentation. I'm showing slides from his presentation, and he's finding inspiration from here, kind of sort of geometrical patterns that you find in pottery, and he also makes a relationship between how the aesthetics of chapel design and then lowriders are also are related. So he sees how different kinds of, how a heritage kind of goes from one thing to another in time. Next slide. So here are some of his initial experiments where he took lowrider designs, pottery, and started to readapt it to in different forms and how that could be used into our gallery. But it was mostly now playing with the forms and also CNC the shapes. Next slide. We see here another material research. He looked at the beams or vigas in these mission chapels throughout the Southwest in California, and thought that we could work with those, something like with those beams. And here the picture that's actually rotated is on purpose to show how we think we could use beams vertically in order to create this wall that would then shield the theater behind it. We needed some kind of visual barrier and an acoustical barrier between the theater that's in there and then the photo that's on the outside, between them. But also we wanted to create something beautiful. At the same time, he's very ecological, and he's looking at this pine wood from the Southwest that at this moment suffers from a beetle infestation, and that's what gives it a blue tint. So he wants to mark that moment in time by using this type of wood in the fabrication of this. And also here are some of his first iterations. You see here 4 different computer, simple computer renderings. And the one on the top left, those would be, the beams would sort of be stacked together, all vertically together. And then he starts molding it, and then he's finding ways of giving another porosity to it. As a direction I also gave him, I wanted to be able to see a little bit of light of the projection that happens inside the theater. So it was another way of layering, right? Layering within the exhibit of what happens in the theater, to be able to see through it. We're going to put pieces of glass in between these holes to cover up the sound. But then you could also see there's an activity there. And then there's going to be a very long bench there, about an 18-foot wide bench that's incorporated into that space. So it's going to be, we're still working on it. He'll be working on more iterations, but the idea is to sort of create just another kind of art piece within the gallery with a very different intensity of design, a very different kind of language. But it'll be its own piece within that. And it kind of makes a bookmark to the photo area, kind of an ending piece to that photo area. And I'll remind you on the other side, there's a very digital wall. So there's a very two different there's a modern digital thing, and then there's more piece that's more earth-bounded. In Spanish, you say terrucal, more of the earth. And I find that one is like the earth, and the other one's sort of like the territory. And there'd be a digital map where you're able to find demographic information about Latinos in contrast to this other piece. Next slide. You should be seeing an example of different ironworks that is ubiquitous around Latino houses in Puerto Rico, where I grew up, in El Paso, Texas. You see these all over the place, San Diego. in many places. And there's a utilitarian thing that's given a kind of an artistic spin to it in many cases. And it was colonial, but then also very modern in its use. So we want to re-signify that and use it in our gallery. And so we used it in our title wall, and also this in the gallery name wall, which is on the other side of the entrance. So this is on the present is on the left, and then the circle piece is on the right of the entrance with the media piece in between. Again, this is all ironwork. It won't be CNC'd. It would be actually made by hand with illuminated stucco behind it. To the left of the gate, we have a donor recognition wall, and also an accessibility panel. Here you're able to, we show how people how to use the keypad that's inside the gallery, and QR code as well. So they're right at the beginning, so there's an introduction and you learn how to use it. Next slide. Here's more ironwork. Again, being playful with it, using it in different kinds of geometrical shapes, away from the standard of how it's used. And we're using it for donor recognition. We have 2 levels of donor hierarchy here, the middle one being more important than the one on the left for those who give less. That's the name of the game. And then on the right, we have a branding moment with the Latino Center, and then a temporary poster of different activities that will be happening throughout the whole Smithsonian institution. So another part of our work was to work extensively with Potion and their media design. So we won't. I'll speak more about the architectural relationship between the two. Potion, they're based here in New York, so it was easy for us to have conversations with them. And so here at the entrance, we have this interaction where you actually go step, and if you step at that medallion, you see there at the bottom of the floor, it's a kind of bronzy looking shaped circle. A person will come up to you and speak and invite you into the gallery. And then they keep on walking towards the left. The size of that wall and the folding of it is reflective of the size of the cases and the angles of the nooks. And also inside the cases, a little less noticeable, but there's also these sort of faceted walls behind the cases that divide the content inside the case. So this sort of faceting is very much part of our language, and we incorporate it into their digital design. Next slide. Here we're showing the photo. I'm showing different slides here. At the bottom, we see a snippet of the axon of that photo area where you have 8 totems. These are vertical panels with a digital touchscreen on it. And again, you can go up to it, click on it, and you'll be able to hear a story and ask different questions that are already selected for you, and meet a Latino. And that was sort of the idea, sort of to unpack and make familiar who we are because we feel that there's great ignorance about what Latinos are and who we are in our own diversity. So in this case, we're hoping to get Jennifer Lopez. I don't know if that's going to be a reality, but and we also want to get other people, just everyday people as well. And you'll be able to click and you'll hear that story. The piece in the middle there, that slide in the middle, is a little bit about the graphic concept. The way you slide through the different people, characters that you'll be presenting, it's in a kind of a plaza environment. So it sort of completes a picture all around the 360. So that's the kind of coordination that we have to work with them in order to produce that sort of effect. Next slide. Again, here we see, this is about the photo and the bookmarking of the 2 end pieces. I already sort of spoke to that a little bit before, but that map of the US, that would be at the back side of the entrance wall that faces the interior, the foro. Foro is forum, by the way. I think we can say that, forum in English. And this is where you would find sort of demographic information. I think the kind of visitor that would see this is the kind that likes to read economists instead of the more to nitty-gritty numbers. But we also want that. We also want to, bring that to life, show that to life. And then at the other end, we have the sculptural piece by emerging objects. And then we have the photo all around. And this is the heart of the exhibit in creating that and creating a unique space. And to me, in many ways, it's kind of like on the left, we have the territory in the map. On the right, we have the land through that kind of sculptural and material work. And then in the middle, we have the people. So that's sort of the symbology that works throughout that space. So, and with that, I think I've concluded my presentation. So gracias. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So first of all, I would like to, on behalf of IDEA and the AIADC, I would like to thank Carolina, Andres, Mariano, and Eduardo for such a comprehensive and insightful presentation. I'm sure that for many people in the audience, this was probably the first time learning about the Smithsonian Latino Center or the Molina Family Latino Gallery. But after tonight, we have a clear understanding of the project, the different processes that I went through to get to this point. At this point, I would like to invite the audience to use the chat and the Q&A to ask any questions that you may have for the panelists. We will start the discussion and then we will get back to the different questions from you. So Eduardo, I would like to start the conversation with you. We have been talking about this presentation for some time now, and from my own personal experience as alumnus of the Young Ambassador Program, which is one of the Latino Center's educational programs, I have an understanding that the Smithsonian Latino Center is at the forefront of preserving Latino history and culture, as well as making sure that representation is part of the Smithsonian institution as a whole. How did the vision of showcasing identity and shaping the gallery's experience evolve throughout the design process?
Ooh, that's a long question. As I said before, representation matters, and I think our community is so diverse from so many perspectives that we wanted to make sure that we did our best job in representing the diversity and the scope of that community. Immigrants, non-immigrants, LGBTQ, folks that had certain quote unquote disabilities and so forth. And all of that needed to be packed in if we were going to be truly representative of the breadth of that community. So, we may have missed some things. I'm sure we did. There's only so much you can do in 4,500 square feet, and the next exhibitions will be dealing more with episodes of Latino history and particular aspects of that. The second exhibit will probably focus on the history of Latino youth movement. So that's going to be a completely different exhibition. All of the interactives will be different. But it's really, really important that we represent the entirety of the community. And let me just stop for a second while I have the floor to thank the Molina family, right? And I think it's important to do that because I think the spirit of the Molinas really inspired the work that we've done here at the gallery. See, David Molina was a doctor. He was a teacher first from Yuma, Arizona, Mexican immigrant. And he and his wife, Mary, started a very small clinic. He was an emergency room physician who noticed that a lot of people were coming in Long Beach, California, were coming to the emergency room who really didn't have emergencies, but didn't have anywhere to go get basic health care. And he decided to open the clinic. He didn't have an easy time getting financing because while he may have been a doctor, he was also a Mexican, and banks were hesitating to give him the loans necessary to establish the clinic. But yet he persisted, opened a clinic, and then that became 6 clinics, 12 clinics, 24 clinics, and Molina Healthcare, which traded on the stock market as a Fortune 500 company. So he was a social entrepreneur. He saw a need in the community. And I think that spirit of community and service is what I think really propels many of us at the Latino Center and our board, some of whom are actually members of the Molina family, at least one, to make sure that we represent the entirety of the Latino experience and all the contributions we've made to building this country and shaping national culture. Not an easy task, but we're giving it a shot, and we have the very best designers to enable us to do that.
No, that's great, Eduardo, and thank you for sharing a little bit about the Molina family and like telling us more about that. Once open to the public, the gallery will become the first national Latino gallery on the National Mall. Could you talk to us a little bit more about like the process of finding its location, and how was the National Museum of American History selected?
Well, we started out, we started shopping, right? And we looked at a space in the Arts and Industries building, which is next to the castle. I'm going to wrap this up because I see there's a lot of very interesting questions coming into the chat, so I want to get to those. But very briefly, we decided that was too expensive of a proposition, and we started looking and we found a space. And the space that we're going in was being used for storage, if you believe that. I mean, I'm not going to even go there, but I mean, why storage? Okay, but we sort of took over, and it has been, we figured, you know, again, we've mentioned many times, Andrés has mentioned it, Carolina's mentioned it, Mariano's mentioned it, Latino history is American history. So we needed to center the Latino narrative as part of the national narrative. And so we're in the best place we could possibly be.
No, that's great. And just to follow up and just finish the conversation about like the action space, is there a plan for a future freestanding museum for like a Smithsonian National Latino Museum?
Well, there is the Congress, or the House has passed a bill, and it is over in the Senate. Of course, there's a lot going on in our country. I don't know what the Senate's gonna, they have other things on their mind right now, I guess. There's supposed to be a Senate hearing on the bill, and I don't know what's gonna happen. We're not involved with the political process at this point. You know, this is really about the politics of value and worth. This is what it boils down to. And up to now, Congress hasn't felt that our community was either worthy enough or valuable enough to establish a museum. Maybe the Congress will act in its full entirety. The House has acted, the Senate, quien sabe, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. And at that point, then we take the next step. We are so focused on the Latino gallery right now, on the Molina gallery. I really can't speculate on what's going to happen. That's a political decision that I don't know what's going to be the outcome of.
No, absolutely. And we're getting a lot of comments in the chat, and a lot of people and all of us are very excited about the Latino gallery. So we're looking forward for 2022 and hopefully be visiting in person in Washington, DC. So now let's talk a little bit more about design. During the presentation, the concept of sensory mapping, different expert user meetings and testing of prototypes and mockups was touched upon. From past experiences, is this typical in exhibit design, or can you elaborate how effective this process was for the gallery?
That's really for Carolina, I think.
And Mariano and Andrés as well.
Andrés as well.
Sure, I can speak to it to start, but I do think it's a question for everyone. I think maybe the degree or the level into which we dove into these topics is not usual. It was a unique opportunity, and it started, you know, with the Latino Center deciding that this was going to be a goal that we were going to be held accountable to, and we were all going to work together on. And that really helps kind of steer us together. And, you know, we talked about Access Smithsonian, we talked about the resources and their expertise that they bring to every one of our charrettes, so that we're making sure that it's not something that we do at the end like a checklist, but we're using it to make the design decisions. It's an active part of the design. So, you know, I would love to say that hopefully I get the opportunity to continue working this way. If maybe I don't have all the resources, at least I have all of the learning that we did, all of this experience to carry through in the next projects. Working with user experts, I think is, you know, it's incredible, because to me, that's the definition of inclusive design. But like now you're actually bringing people to weigh in, and you're collecting the data, and you're assessing how to use that data to make your design. That's ultimately creative process. And that's, it's about equity, but it's also about just creative process, I think.
I'd like to add to that. it's typical in exhibit design to study the effects of your speakers and where the sound's going to spread, your projections and how you have to control the light within that. What is new here, it was actually the whole inclusivity design, and how does that affect the experience on that level of work. So that was a new thing there. Also, I'd like to say something about that process, that it wasn't exactly like you sit down with user experts and it's all kumbaya and we're all very nice to each other. No, we discuss things. And for myself, I sort of lost the fear of being able to sort of speak out my mind. You know, my father was blind, so I kind of know what living with disability is. And so I could sort of throw that out, and thinking that, oh, well, that's not going to work for a blind person, because I know what a blind person can do, at least what my father can do. So there was that sort of process that needed workshops, that needed to be worked out through, and not just simply sort of following guidelines. We needed the discussions, and that's what was unique about this project.
Mm-hmm.
Just on my experiences, I worked in several projects throughout two decades or so, and throughout the world. And this is the first time I really experienced dealing with inclusive design from the beginning of a project. It's usually, as Carolina said, it's always a checklist at the end. And I think that was, I think that there are many things this project will be remembered and appreciated for, but I really believe that this is one of the main ones. And it's actually, I learned a lot from it, and I hope that actually all visitors will find the content and stories accessible.
No, and I mean, that's great. Like, it sounds like this has been a very, like a great learning experience, not only for the client, but for the designers and architects and the users. And it's great to see how close, like, everyone was able to like come together to like finalize the design. Now, understanding that we have a challenging space, because it is a space inside, a space within the museum. So what were the biggest or the major challenges that designing the new gallery in this space presented? And are there any lessons learned from like other projects that any of you brought into this project?
Go for it. I was busy answering questions in the chat. I'm sorry.
So I'd say, what was like the biggest challenge of designing the gallery in the given space at the American History Museum?
No, I think actually it was, I didn't feel any sort of like difficulties. There are, I would say not so much the space. It's actually the National Museum has very strict rules about the treatment of artifacts and how how to use those. If you remember one of my conceptual designs, we had a much more open display of artifacts, and we all thought that would be more accessible. Also, the accessibility team wanted that to be more so. Right. But the National Museum of Natural History, sorry, my light is flashing there. They have certain rules about it, and we have to work with that very carefully, and about how to mount objects and all of that. So that's actually the challenge that you have to sort of make sure that you're following their rules. They're more strict than other museums that I work for, and so the case that we're actually providing them is actually state of the art for protecting. Even though the entire museum is acclimatized for humidity controls and heat controls, we still have to go even further within the cases as well. So that, I would say, that would be the greater challenge of it. And then there's for instance, for us to bring in the co-creation of the building of that jewel piece there, that's new, right? And so you break the design step of it, and you're bringing out. It's almost like the lights are coming in. Sorry about that. And so we had to sort of step them through the process that we will bring these people later into the process of design.
Let me just also say one thing. We carved out almost 500 square feet for a learning space, right? Mm-hmm. Which is very unusual. Most galleries are just exhibition spaces, and that's it. And then you say, well, if you want to do education programs, you go outside the gallery, you go to the designated education space in the museum, which the museum has. It has a fabulous space for interaction with young children, middle school kids, whatever. And that we have access to them, that's fine. But we wanted to create a space, we carved out 1/5 of the gallery space and made it a learning lounge. And my colleagues, Emily Key, Adriana Aldaba, and Natalia Febo have done a fantastic job with their advisors to create intergenerational learning opportunities that deal with subject matter that goes back to what's in the gallery. So there's an interconnection here. But that's, some people say, well, that's crazy. Why did you give up almost 500 square feet for an education space where they could get somewhere else? You messed up there. And we said, no, we didn't. We wanted to create an integrated experience, right? So the people didn't have to leave. And plus, like, maybe you could charge their phone at the same time, but, which is a benefit, right? So, we wanted to make this, this for sure is a gallery space that you're not going to see in most museums, and certainly not in any history museums. And so we made some compromises, and the commitment to inclusive design, as many have gone over, especially Carolina, that's a big decision. It's more expensive. It takes up more space. We want to make sure that the clearances are what they need to be. We want to make sure the visual the mapping that Carolina put together is ridiculous. I mean, the way in which the detail in which she gave in terms of sound and light and so forth. Well, there are some concessions to be made there, but we were not going to have a space that didn't deliver as best experiences we could possibly give to those who had these, I'll call them limitations, right? They're really not, but they are real. I mean, they're real. If you can't see, you have hearing impairment, those are real challenges, but that's not an excuse. We have to make sure that we deliver as quality experience as we can, regardless of your situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I'll just say my additional information about the challenges is not as exciting as these comments, but yes, I think it's always this negotiation of space. So we started with 4,500 square feet, and then we had a lot of ambitions, and the learning lounge is one example, right? And so everybody's fighting for space, and everyone, because these ambitions are all valuable. There isn't a single one of these things that is not valuable. So how do you manage all those things to ultimately make decisions where you may remove things, but you're still adding to the experience even when you remove things? So I think that was challenging. And then on the black box side, we're designing the infrastructure. We started with a storage room. We had to update all of the mechanical systems, the sprinkler systems. We had to think about how we were going to get power to some of these foro elements in the middle of the space in an existing space. We're not constructing it from zero, right? So there's also a lot of just coordination, technical, engineering challenges that this project brought for us as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's great to know that the gallery will have this education space, because if you look at the work of the Smithsonian Latino Center, it's all about education, museology, and storytelling. So that component, I think, plays a very important part. Mm-hmm. And so now let's think about, as Latino and Latina designers, how significant has this project been for your careers? Were there any times that your background and understanding of the Latino culture influenced the way you thought about design solutions or your work methodology?
I'll participate in that question. Well, for me, this project was sort of a dream come true. This is what I've always wanted to do, and do these kinds of works. And I've done other Latino exhibits. I've worked for the Museo del Barrio and Nicosia Community Center for an exhibit there. And I'm very much interested in sort of bicultural studies. I work also for the Museum of Chinese in America. And I find that also fascinating and intriguing. And many of the issues that they go through, we also as Latino immigrants go through as well. So, and including the whole bilingual exhibit thing is something that of course I cannot check the spelling in the Chinese panels that I designed, but anyhow, but I also put a lot of thought into what is, what would be a Latino exhibit design, right? Is there such thing as a design that's for and by Latinos? And I think there is, and I think we're doing it in this gallery. We're expressing it, and by being careful about where we source our ideas and our inspiration, and keeping that in mind, and then producing it and with other people. It's pretentious, like I said before, it's pretentious to me to say I know all Latino stuff. No, I don't. I'm from Puerto Rico. I have Argentinian heritage. My wife's Venezuelan, but there's other heritages from Mexico and other places that I might have a friend, but it's not the same. So you bring those things in and with sensibility, and you work it through. And I think there's a way of working it. And I'll just give a small anecdote of working in other exhibit design firms where I was working in a science museum, and we wanted to do a 3D sculpture of it was sort of like a molecular structure, and I referenced these sort of bead designs from Mexican art that often do these works, sculptures covered in beads, as a model for us to create the model for the science museum. And everybody was shocked in that design firm because they thought, no, we're not doing the Mexican museum, we're doing the science museum. And I was like, okay, well, then I showed them a pointless painting, and everybody got the example of the pointless painting, because they're much more used to that sort of language being taught in school and followed up. So I do think that there is a way of that the source of where your inspiration is from is very important. And I've worked for myself. I'm very conscious of it as when I work.
Just for me, quickly, I would say, first of all, I mean, although I've been living in the US for 20 years, I think that I didn't really know the depth and the breadth of Latino history and the richness and the diversity of these stories. There isn't one story, there are tons of stories. There is a way of looking at the history of America, maybe, but there's so many ways to see it. So this myriad of the Latino experience, that it's multiple experiences. So for me, it was in a certain way a huge learning experience, more than a challenge. The challenge was really how to tell this rich story in such small space. I hope that one day we do, and I hope that Eduardo does it, get them all. So I really think we deserve it. I think it's very rich, and I think it's very important for us. So I would say that, I mean, for me, the most important thing is just to really understand who we are and where we stand, and to really kind of change the way that we think. The usual story of America is told through a lens that is also an American story, that is a Latino vision of the American story. So I will put it more in those ways rather than a design perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the Latino culture is so rich, like you mentioned, and we all share the Spanish, and even language, it starts becoming like complicated with like all the dialects that we have in our own different cultures. So, I mean, I can imagine that working for this project, it's such a great honor. And before going to like the audience questions, and I seen that a lot of the questions have been answered already, I would like to acknowledge 2020 and all the limitations that we have experienced in the last few months. What has been the biggest, let's say, challenge of designing a new inclusive gallery under the times that we're experiencing with the ongoing pandemic? Besides the physical, the sensory, universal design explorations, has social distancing played an impact in the final design of the gallery? Has that been considered?
Let me just say, the Smithsonian is opening gradually, right? All of its museums. And so the new normal is one that we have to pay attention to cleaning regimes, right? To look at non-bacterial finishes on some of the objects that are going to be interactive. Social distancing, obviously. So we're working very closely with the National Museum of American History and the Smithsonian generally to ensure that we're abiding by the protocols. People are going to touch things, right? They're going to hold on to the escalator railing, the chair, the staircase railings. They're going to push an elevator button. They're going to you go to the restroom and whatnot. So there's, we have to, it's a new day. I mean, hopefully by the time we open this gallery in the spring of 2022, we will be back to quote unquote normal, right? And there will be a vaccine and whatnot, but we can't bank on this. We don't know what's going to happen. So we are taking all the necessary precautions that we possibly can.
Yeah, but I think also maybe to add to that, we're also not removing things. We're not assuming that all touchables are now bad. That's not really the approach we want to take for the reasons we talked about. So it's really just thinking about what are the protocols that we can use. I think there's discussion about using different materials, perhaps are more antibacterial, but the goal should not be to simplify the experience or limit the experience because of this, because then we're locking ourselves to a very, bad experience that is not going to be inclusive if that's the route that we take.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're hoping that we can get over the pandemic as soon as we can. But of course, we have to, for right now, stay put and be careful about it. Mm-hmm. So let me start looking back at the questions from the users. I see that a question from Tom Ancona. Do the user experts do testing and evaluation of different Latino groups by country of origin, US region, generation, and non-Latino as well?
Well, let me just say this. The user experts that Carolina was referring to and others were referring to really are those people who were blind or had low vision, those who were hearing impaired or deaf, and some who had cognitive challenges or brain-based challenges. Before we even began the process, and a point that Mariano raised during the interpretive master planning process, which took place many years ago, we did some initial testing, random intercepts, some focus groups with Afro-Latinos, with more indigenous communities, like we have a big Bolivian community, for example, in the DC area. So we did individual focus groups to test certain concepts of exhibition content and what kind of experiences they wanted to have. So that was done earlier on, but the user experts per se were those with we'll quote, special needs, unquote, quote unquote.
Yeah, I'll add to Ranald and Lola, the curators, tested some of the subject matters of the curation beforehand in the interpretive planning.
Right.
So that's the way, the kind of more demographic study of it. But then when it comes to inclusive design, it was more based on what type of challenge you may have.
I see another question, one from Joan. It is, what role did a digital design team play in the creation of the content and the design of the space?
Go ahead, Mariano.
Okay. No, they did. They came a little bit later. We already had a kind of general floor plan. The concept design was actually established at that point, and then they joined us. But they then impacted it a lot with their work. The entrance of the gallery, we actually had a more faceted kind of moment with different, and then they came up with this sort of animation and this greeter coming to it, and we liked that a lot and incorporated. So there is, integration of the design. We took the lead. We created the main spaces that we thought would suffice the interpretive planning requirements, and then they joined in and they finessed our design. For instance, the nooks, we had them as static, more static graphic spaces, and they turned them into more audiovisual spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say that I think the importance of digital culture. I mean, one thing is an object, another thing is the digital representation of that object. So I think the curatorial process is one which is informed from when you go to the physical to the digital, right? Because it's its own thing, right? How do we use virtual reality or augmented reality? How do we use the back end, the sort of digital hub, to be able to distribute, to archive, to curate, and then distribute knowledge in a digital format versus an object or a graphic you might see in an exhibition case? So Hoshin was involved, as Mariano said, not right at the beginning, but certainly jumped in right at the appropriate time. And so it's been collaborative since that point.
Great.
The joint and schematic design, not concept.
All right. We would like to be conscious about the time. It's 8 p.m. Are there any closing remarks from any of you before we close the panel?
I don't know what to say. I mean, I think we've covered it all. I think, we've been really blessed to have Mariano, Carolina, and Andres on this project. We would not be here, obviously, without their creativity and their dedication to the project. I can't thank enough our accessibility team, all of the Latino Center staff, which has been amazing, and our board, which has been terribly productive, and even all the way to the Smithsonian Secretary, Lonnie Bunch. I mean, this is a priority for the Smithsonian. Regardless of what happens with the museum, that's a political decision, as I mentioned. We're moving forward with this, and we couldn't do it without everybody's involvement. So it's been a total team effort, and I'm proud to be associated with it. I don't know what else to say. And I thank the audience, and it's great to have people opining and giving us feedback, which is really very helpful to us. And thank you.
I'd like to say also thank you folks in LA.IDEA. I think it's a great idea. LA.IDEA is a great idea to have Latino designers and engineers coming together and discussing from their perspective. I think it's important, and I'm very happy to participate in this type of forum.
In my opinion, I have to say a few things. First is it's been a pleasure, and it continues to be a pleasure to work in this project. I think that I have experienced usually in many museums and projects, like decisions and everything tends to be very vertical. This is the way it is, and I think that this project has been very cohesive, group oriented, very horizontal. And I think it really talks about this collaborative design process, that it really mixes not only architects, accessibility team, media team, user groups, and the curatorial team, of course, and management and learning, but it's really like very horizontal and very dialogue. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing, not only in design, but many things that thing is starting on. And I think that's been amazing. And I think the other thing that I want to say is it's really great that LA.IDEA, as Mariano said, had this idea, which is really to kind of showcase the work that we're all doing. And I hope you continue to do it, and we'll be there for you, and we'll continue to, of course, work with you, but also watch your events. Thank you.
Very much. Yeah, and I mean, Carolina, do you have something or?
Well, I know we don't have time, so I'll just echo what everybody said. I'm just extremely grateful that I have the chance to work on this project. As an architect, I'm not directly in touch with the content as much as Andres and Mariano, and actually making those decisions on how to showcase information, but just being able to participate in the design of the space for a gallery that's so important. Somebody in one of our meetings yesterday from the board said that this gallery was going to be a bridge for people, a way to bring people in who know nothing about this history. I mean, it's history that's not usually emphasized or not told very well, and it's very complex. And so this is a way to entice them to come with their curiosity to learn. And hopefully, even if you take one or two things out of this, this is already a bridge. You've already connected with people. You're already making things better. And just being part of, I'm on the physical side of designing the space to enhance this experience, but that experience is wonderful. And I'm just so happy that I got to participate, and I keep getting to participate throughout this project.
Definitely. And the only thing that I can say now is that on behalf of LA.IDEA and AIA DC, we're very thankful to all of you, to Eduardo and the Smithsonian Latino Center, to Mariano and Museum Environments, to Andres and Orb, Carolina with Queen Evans. We're very grateful for the amazing work they're doing to showcase our culture, to represent the Latino heritage in the United States here in Washington, DC. And I mean, I wish that this event could have been in person and we could have been together, but I'm looking forward to the day in 2022 that the gallery opens and getting a chance to meet all of you and sharing in person this incredible work of sharing the story of the Latino culture in the United States. So once again, thank you very much. And thank you everyone from the audience for all the comments and from participating tonight. As a reminder, please visit LA.IDEA.com to learn about our work, what we do to help Latino designers and professionals in Washington, DC and around the United States come together and share this type of ideas and talent. So once again, thank you very much and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Buenas
Buenas
noches.
noches.
Buenas noches.